What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today we're going to be taking a really deep look at the maps we're going to be seeing for launch with Black Ops 6. More specifically, we're going to be looking at the sizes of these maps and comparing them to known maps like Nuketown and Raid. And initially I wasn't going to do this video, but I really feel the need to correct a lot of misconceptions that are now being spread around the community, specifically from a video that NerosCinema made a few days back. Now, to be clear, I like Nero. I've got no issues with Nero whatsoever, so this isn't me trying to start beef with him or anything, but his video that he made was wildly inaccurate, as he was sharing map size comparisons that are so incredibly far off in some cases that it's misleading people, and I'm noticing a lot of the comments on that video are essentially just piling on with that criticism based on false information. And I do think this is starting to spread a little bit, and it's actually turning some people against the game, which is frustrating. I have no issue if you don't like the game or you don't like elements of the game. I think we should be critical. We should speak up when we don't like something. In fact, I said it in my feedback videos, I do think the map selection we had access to in the beta was a little bit underwhelming for Treyarch. I tend to have slightly higher standards for Treyarch when it comes to the map design, so I think it's totally fair to be critical of the map design in the game. And if you don't like it, speak out, that's totally fine. My issue here is backing up and spreading criticism based on completely inaccurate information. So again, this isn't really targeted at Nero, but I am going to be tearing apart his video pretty harshly here because his map size comparisons were way off in most cases, and there are ways of doing this much more accurately than what he did. And just a recap of what he did here, he found the grid lines on the map overviews that we got, and he matched up those grid lines. And admittedly, I was initially going to make a video based on that, but the moment I started matching them up, I saw some massive inconsistencies here. Like a car should not be the size of a house, for instance, so it was pretty clear that those grid lines were inaccurate. It appeared Nero didn't pick up on that, and he just ran with those grid lines, and that's why he ended up with such wildly inaccurate results. So I don't think he purposely skewed things or did things maliciously here. I think it was just an honest mistake, and he didn't really take a close enough look at this before running with it. So let's dive into these comparisons, and we're going to focus on the beta maps first, because with these, I can actually get very accurate information because we have exact distances on those maps, and I can calculate exact distances on known maps like Nuketown and Raid from Cold War, and we can compare those all side by side. So here we go. Here's all the core maps compared to Nuketown and Raid, using exact distances and scaling everything perfectly to the nearest pixel. And just in case you guys are wondering how I found these exact distances on the beta maps, in Domination, you can see exactly how many meters you are away from the Domination marker. So I would just scroll through my gameplay, find a point where I can see that distance marker, take the exact location that I was standing on the minimap versus the exact location of the center of that flag marking. And there we go. We got our exact distances there. And you'll also notice with Nuketown and Raid, I calculated the total amount of pixels within this particular image, which is scaled appropriately. So we get our total playable footprint size of those maps. And then I just calculated how much bigger or smaller all of the beta maps were relative to Nuketown. So Rewind, for instance, is roughly 3.4 times larger than Nuketown when it comes to total playable footprint. Babylon's actually 22% smaller when it comes to the total footprint. Skyline, well, it has roughly the same length of Nuketown. It does have a bit more width to it, and therefore it's actually 1.6 times larger than Nuketown in total playable area. And again, that's just the footprint. We're not looking at the multiple levels and everything too. And even Derelict is a bit bigger than Nuketown when it comes to that playable area. And one of the ones I wanted to focus on here, because it's one of the ones that Nero covered specifically, is Protocol. And this is just to show how far off some of his measurements were here, and why none of them can really be taken seriously. With Nero's comparison using those grid lines, you can see that Nuketown is apparently noticeably longer than Protocol overall, and it covers almost all of Protocol. And if you consider the areas of Nuketown that are going out of bounds on Protocol, overall, it appears that the total playable area of Nuketown is actually larger than the total playable area of Protocol. However, with the proper comparison, using the exact distance measurements to the nearest meter, you can see Nuketown is quite noticeably smaller than Protocol. In fact, you would have to scale up Nuketown by 45% versus Protocol in order to get the image that Nero ended up getting, and that is far from just a minor mistake or a little detail that's slightly off. That is wildly misleading. That is so far off. And for anybody that went into the training area on Protocol throughout the beta, it was immediately obvious that that map is noticeably bigger than Nuketown. It's not Nuketown small. Now, I'm not going to call it a super large map by any means, but it is absolutely very noticeably bigger than Nuketown, and it is what I would classify as a medium map in Call of Duty, just like Treyarch did. So there we go. Those are the comparisons versus the beta maps where I have really nice measurements to work off of, and I'm super confident in these results. From here on out, we are going to go through each of the individual core maps that are coming at launch that we didn't have access to in the beta, but I do want to be clear at this point, while I am confident that I've got significantly more accurate results than what Nero showed in his video for these maps coming up, they are not necessarily going to be as perfectly accurate as the beta maps, especially with certain maps where we don't have too many comparable assets. And that's how I was able to find the rough scale of these maps. Based on the images or little clips that we've seen on these launch maps, there are certain assets that are shared across some of the beta maps. And therefore, if we can compare it to the beta maps, scale that to the best of our ability appropriately with those, then we can match them up with Nuketown and Raid again. And let's just start this off with Vault, since this is an easy one, since we actually have the exact same van asset on the map Rewind as we're seeing right here on Vault. So if we match those ones up perfectly, we can see Vault is roughly 3.38 times larger than Nuketown when it comes to total footprint. And again, I think I would safely classify that as a medium-sized map. Next up, let's have a look at Vorkuta, and in Nero's video, he compared this to Raid rather than Nuketown. And also, when he scaled the difference between Raid and Nuketown, he was about 15% off on that one as well. But in either case, when we look at it here, we've got a shipping container on Vorkuta that is the same width, at least, as the shipping container on Derelict. So I was able to match up those assets. And as we can see here, it is very clear that Vorkuta is a larger map than Raid, unlike what Nero showed, where Raid would have had a noticeably larger footprint. That's simply not the case. In fact, Vorkuta is about 1.21 times larger than Raid based on this testing. Next up, we have Lowtown, which is apparently the size of Nuketown, or maybe even slightly smaller than Nuketown. However, based on my measurements here, using the length of a van that was tipped on its side compared to a van on Rewind, Lowtown is roughly 2 times larger than Nuketown when it comes to total playable space. After that, we have Red Card, which, according to Nero, this is noticeably larger than Nuketown. You could probably fit about 2 Nuketowns within one Red Card, according to this image. However, if you scale this based on the size of a van once again, Red Card is actually about 3.5 times larger than Nuketown, not just roughly twice as large. And that wraps it up for the maps that Treyarch listed as medium-sized maps coming at launch. And I would say, so far, the descriptions for those are all perfectly accurate. I would classify every one of those non-beta maps that I just went over as medium-sized maps, just like Treyarch did. Now let's talk about the 2 small maps, and these ones are quite small. Also, the assets on this one, I didn't find a perfect match for these assets on any of the beta maps that we played. So I'll say my confidence level on these ones being perfectly accurate goes down even more with these small maps compared to the ones I just covered. So let's start this off with Subsonic, and this is Nero's image of Subsonic with Nuketown laid over top. And this is the measurement that I got with Subsonic, roughly comparing 2 APCs, which appear to be slightly different assets, so therefore I'm not 100% confident that their sizes are perfect, but it should be at least quite close. And it turns out in this case, this actually looks pretty similar to the results that Nero got using the grid lines. So I believe on Subsonic, the grid lines were actually accurate to the comparison map that he used, which was Warhead, which is one of the face-off maps. So when it comes to Subsonic, yeah, it's a small map for sure. It's a very small map. It is worth noting, still with this comparison, the total playable space, since it is more of a square map, is actually very slightly larger than Nuketown. And that's because Nuketown is more of like a long, skinny map compared to Subsonic. But as far as distances from one end of the map to the other, Subsonic is very significantly smaller than Nuketown. And this just leaves us with Payback, which is another small map. And this is the image that Nero got with Nuketown overlaid on top of it. And with this one, I am the least confident since there were no assets that lined up perfectly. There was a cargo truck on Babylon and a cargo truck on Payback, although the length of that cargo truck on Payback looks to be noticeably longer. So I was trying to basically just use the width of this. So with this one, there is a fair amount of room for error on this, but this is the results that I found. And if anything, it appears Payback is actually very noticeably smaller than Nuketown. Although intuitively looking at this, I do feel like I scaled this down a little too much, but I'm sticking to the exact same method I used for the other ones for consistency's sake here. And it appears Payback is actually noticeably smaller than Nuketown in not only length, but also playable area. So just like Treyarch stated, when it comes to those 12 6v6 core maps at launch, 8 of them are going to be medium-sized maps, and 4 out of those 12 will be smaller maps. And here's all of the maps put together to scale to the best of my ability here, with Nuketown and Raid as a reference in the top right corner. And overall, when it comes to these map sizes, I've said it before and I'll say it again, as much as I don't generally like playing large maps on a regular basis, I do always like having like 1 or maybe 2 large maps mixed into rotation just to break up the monotony a little bit of these small to medium-sized maps. Ideally for me, I do prefer the more medium-sized maps, and it looks like we're getting quite a few of those in this game. And I also don't mind the small meat grinder maps too much, as long as they don't show up too often. And that's generally my issue with these small meat grinder maps, is when they pop up to be voted for, they tend to win the votes. And especially in a game like Black Ops 6, where we have a face-off playlist, where it's 6v6 on 2v2 maps essentially, with no score streaks and everything involved. I was kind of hoping that would mean that we would see fewer of those really small meat grinder maps for core modes, but it does look like we're going to be seeing at least a couple of those at launch, with those of course being Babylon and Payback, and then I fully suspect they're going to be adding Nuketown shortly after launch, since that is a trend that we tend to see with Treyarch and Black Ops games. And there we go, that's pretty much it. As far as the quality of these maps go, especially the maps that we haven't played yet, I really just want to wait and see. I did share some of my thoughts and opinions on that in a video last week, just based on the overviews, but you can really only gather so much based on overviews, and I really just want to get my hands on it and see how they end up playing out. And with that, that is going to wrap it up for today's video, and this is where I'm curious to hear from you guys in those comments down below. Now that you've seen much more accurate map size comparisons here, how are you feeling about the general sizes of the maps that we can expect at launch for Black Ops 6? Are you guys generally happy to see primarily medium-sized maps with a few small ones mixed in there? Do you think there are too many small ones? I know that's been a common piece of feedback for this game. And what are your thoughts on large maps? Are you disappointed to not see any large maps at launch? Or are you happy to see that there aren't any large ones? Just let me know all of those thoughts down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.